Hey folks, if you know me, then you know I love Sonic obscurities and mysteries. I think there's nothing more satisfying than hopping on the internet and trying to solve a mystery like a digital Scooby-Doo. In the past, I've had the pleasure of presenting you lot with some definitive answers to common and uncommon Sonic mysteries. We've done Tails Doll, we've talked about Ashura, we've even covered Cynic. Well, today, I'm going to try my best to uncover a mystery that's always eluded me, and that means talking to you all once again about Sonic the Hedgehog 3. No singular game in the franchise seems to be coated in as much intrigue as Sonic 3. From the Michael Jackson soundtrack stuff, through to the Rankles the Otter hoax, Sonic 3 has always been a source of fascination to me. On the advertising front, here in the UK, I remember seeing these pretty exciting minimalist print ads in magazines that got me pumped for the release of Sonic 3. They're simple but effective, and 30 years later, I still remember them. And on the TV, the game was promoted by a completely forgettable, frankly awful, tie-in song by pop group Right Said Fred. This song is only notable because in the video, you can see some of Hydro City Zone, or Hydrocity Zone, but it doesn't look particularly watery to me. Best forgotten, in my opinion. But one of the joys of the internet is being able to see regional differences in how games are marketed globally, and that is where today's mystery begins. I have to credit VG Densetsu on Twitter for offering up this one. The particular ad I'm going to talk about I first saw on their Twitter. I present to you the mystery. What's the big deal here? Well, what you're looking at is a South Korean print ad for Sonic 3, taken from Korean gaming magazine Game Champ. This is from the March 1994 edition. Game Champ is one of those cozy old magazines filled with awe-inspiring screenshots, original little pieces of artwork, and old school ads. Of course, I never had a Game Champ as a kid, but it reminds me of the stuff that I used to pore over. I've scoured the Game Champ back catalogue, and this issue is the only time that this ad pops up. Let's start dissecting this so you can understand the allure. I'll ignore the monstrous elephant in the room for as long as possible. Now, one minor thing that makes this ad unique is the font. All around the world, even in Japan, Sonic's name is usually rendered in English or using the Western alphabet. This, then, might be the first time I've seen this tradition transgressed, because Sonic here is written in Hangul, or Korean script. Neat, right? A second weird detail is the Samsung branding all over the ad. Surely everybody knows, Sega makes Sonic games, and Samsung make mobile phones and weirdly sexy mascot characters. So what's the deal here? Maybe there was some cross-promotion going on. I can explain in just a second, but first, we can't ignore it any longer. Zoom in on the top right corner, Jarvis. The reason I find this ad so fascinating is because of this little fella. What the hell? So, this looks like a very malformed version of the Sonic 3 title screen sprite, but with a big clown nose and a very odd-looking human hand. I mean, Sonic looks great on the Sonic 3 title screen. Why did this weird mini redesign need to happen? This guy, Samsung Sonic I guess, reminds me of the original version of Movie Sonic, and believe me, that's not a compliment. The ad already has Sonic down here looking perfectly normal, so what happened? Does the Korean text over Sonic give us a clue at all? Nope. I've consulted Oma Chow and he tells me it just reads Samsung Game Software. That's not very insightful.
I know everything.
Since first seeing this ad, I've resolved to try to get to the bottom of it, to try to figure out why this small edit was made to Sonic, and if this warped Sonic mascot was used anywhere else, because, well, that's the sort of thing I do in my free time, I guess. I am able to explain some things about the ad, but not all. But at least there is an interesting story accompanied with this ad, which I'll elaborate on in just a second. Strap in, because I'm going to try and attempt to transport you to the weird world of the Korean gaming scene. No, wrong Korea. I meant to say the South Korean gaming scene. Let's go. Now this is a bit of a long historical story, but it's one I find immensely interesting, and it's one that's well worth telling. I've kind of wanted to touch on this topic before. It fascinates me, but I guess now I have the perfect excuse. South Korea and Japan have a rocky history, to say the least. On August 15th, 1945, after decades of oppressive Japanese rule, Korea finally reclaimed independence, and on that same day enacted the law for punishing anti-national deeds. You see, under Japanese rule, Korean culture and language was suppressed, and in response to this and other Japanese misdeeds, Japanese imports and media were pretty much outright barred, denying Korean citizens access to Japanese goods for decades. The ban wasn't total, however, as we'll see. There were ways, in a sense, to circumvent the ban, and Japanese electronics giants like Sharp and Fujitsu, for example, had been effectively trading in Korea since the 1970s. But let's talk gaming. The Korean video game landscape in the 80s was largely dominated by bootlegs made by Korean enthusiasts or small companies who simply retooled popular games from Japan or the West. A couple of the more famous examples are Superboy 1 and 2, blatant Mario rip-offs made by Korean company Zemina for the Zemix, the first flagship home console made by a Korean company. It was only in 1987 that South Korea began to comply with international copyright laws protecting ownership of computer programs, a move which opened the door to Korea's home console golden age. You probably won't find any Korean gamers nostalgic for the NES, because they didn't have it, but my research suggests that the first successful NES clone arrived in Korea in 1988. Competing against a horde of Famiclones from Taiwan, this console was released by a company called Frog, and marketed as the Frog computer. Literally just a Famicom with a new plastic shell and a frog sticker on it. As for Sega, the Mark III seems to be the first Sega system to be released in Korea, albeit a little more officially than the NES. The Mark III, which wasn't released in the West by the way, in case you've never heard of it, was licensed by Korean company Oaks, who proceeded to manufacture and distribute the console in Korea, curiously with Sega branding, which seems to be a bit of an exception for consoles like this. Ultimately in the 1990s, Korean giants Samsung and Hyundai would step in and take over as the licensees of Sega and Nintendo hardware respectively. These two Goliaths took things a little bit more seriously, with Sega and Nintendo consoles now being distributed and advertised, and in some cases even manufactured, I've heard, by Samsung and Korea. This resulted in Hyundai giving us the Comboy and the Super Comboy, which in turn gave us the greatest video game TV ad I've ever seen. Who knew Mario was buddies with Goku? That was awesome. Obviously the Comboy and the Super Comboy are just the NES and SNES, renamed and given a Hyundai makeover. Samsung, on the other hand, rather confusingly gave us the Game Boy and Super Game Boy. Nope, they're not versions of the Game Boy, they're actually rebrands of the Master System and the Mega Drive. Weirdly enough, Samsung also released the Aladdin Boy and the Super Aladdin Boy, which again were the Master System and Mega Drive given a Korean twist. It does make me wonder whether there were Samsung versus Hyundai arguments in 1990s Korea. Did they have their very own console war? I don't know. But this period represents the golden age of Korean home console gaming, a time when more Korean households had home consoles than ever. Ultimately then, this partially explains the Sonic ad. At least we know why there's Samsung branding all over it. There's a little bit more to the story of Korea's home console history though, if you'll humour me a little longer. In 1994, the Korean gaming landscape changed again, when the Korean law banning Japanese cultural depictions and language in media was extended to video games. This was a bit of a disaster. This meant that only a comparatively tiny selection of Korean games or Western releases found their way to Korean consumers. This had a massive, detrimental impact on the console market, as the most popular genre by a country mile, JRPGs, was hit the hardest by this blanket ban. This, along with moral panics over video games triggering epilepsy and violence in kids, claims that were sprinkled with anti-Japanese sentiment, effectively closed the door on Korea's brief console age. In contrast, home computer gaming would only continue to grow, boasting a more vibrant ecosystem of both legitimate and amateur Korean-made games. Games for popular home consoles could even find a home on PCs, thanks to Korean software developers like Jung-Yong-Duk, who meticulously ported Street Fighter II over to PC systems and then wrote a book about it. What of the fate of consoles in Korea then after 1994? Well, by the late 90s, the Korean console scene was winding down. Samsung's version of the Saturn released to very low sales. Hyundai released their version of the N64, which also failed to make a splash. Most tellingly, the Sony PlayStation, which took the world by storm, didn't even get a proper release. I've read that Daewoo had planned to give the PlayStation the Hyundai/Samsung treatment, but the deal fell through, and instead, less reputable companies mass-imported American PlayStations, installed an expensive conversion chip to allow them to play Japanese games, and sold them to little fanfare and a dwindling market. It seems the Dreamcast, by the way, didn't even see a Korean release. Hyundai were actually planning on releasing the console in 2000, after Hyundai Sega was formed, a joint company that distributed Sega amusement machines in Korean arcades. The Dreamcast never arrived though, reportedly because the Dreamcast had a Japanese language option embedded in the system BIOS, though the Dreamcast's poor international performance may also be a reason. Ultimately, Korean restrictions on Japanese culture and imports began to loosen starting in 1999 and were dropped entirely in 2003, allowing Sony to release the PS2 and Nintendo to release the DS. These products were successful, particularly the PS2, which took Korea by storm, but it kind of feels like the damage was already done to Korea's console market. After 94, the Korean PC scene began to dwarf the console scene, not least because PCs were easier for Korean development studios to release popular Korean language games on, but also because in a culture that puts a lot of emphasis on education and achievement and productivity, PCs were seen as educational tools with none of the stigma that marked video game consoles as time sinks for video game addicts. Korea's gaming culture is, nowadays, utterly dominated by mobile and PC gaming, and there seems to be very little nostalgia for Nintendo, Sega, and PlayStation stuff. Considering the story I've just spun, that's entirely understandable. To put it in perspective, the Nintendo Switch released in Korea 9 months after most of the rest of the world, and the Wii U didn't even see a Korean release at all. Perhaps all of this weirdness is why I've not been able to find out anything at all about this elusive print ad. It's not through lack of trying though. On a personal level, I have some skin in the game here. I've spent a significant amount of time in South Korea, and I have first-hand experience exploring the rather scant gaming scene there. The most prominent spot for retro gaming hardware and software was traditionally Yongsan Game Alley in Seoul, a ragtag, Mos Eisley-esque place full of all sorts of electronics, including bootleg games, Korean exclusive stuff, and expensive imports. What I found there was that many games were renamed or rebranded when they were released in Korea, and I'm never sure whether this was done to appeal to Korean tastes or because the games in question were actually bootlegs. What game do you think this is, for example? Well, folks, it's actually Bubsy.
Hey, I thought I saw Elvis back there.
Ultimately, I had to face facts as well. Sonic the Hedgehog is just not particularly popular in South Korea. I did find a few Sonic games out there a long time ago though, and I can revisit them thanks to the power of the internet. Here's a few quick-fire Korean Sonic facts that might help to satiate you. First, most Sonic games in Korea had unique, sometimes unofficial looking covers. Here's Sonic Classics Collection, for example, and here's the original Sonic the Hedgehog. I love the use of Naoto Oshima's artwork here. It's worth noting that Sonic the Hedgehog is referred to as, and you'll have to excuse me butchering the Korean here, Bolandoli Sonic. You can see this on all of the Korean boxes and other promotional materials. That roughly translates to Wind Boy Sonic. It's a cute nickname that's meant to be evocative of his speed. Here's another game, a personal favourite of mine, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. In Korean, the title translates very roughly to Operation Destroy the Beans. I find this sort of stuff pretty neat, but also unfortunately I've read that the legendary Yongsan Game Alley is now largely gone, with most of the vendors moving to other locations, which is a shame. That concludes today's history lesson, but ultimately it does leave today's mystery unsolved. We know that Samsung distributed Sega systems in Korea, and of course took control of the advertising too, but why Sonic got this cheeky redesign and whether it existed outside of this sole print ad is something beyond my research skills. Ultimately, if you're a Korean viewer whose dad works at Samsung, please get in touch and let me know as much as you know about your country's relationship with Sonic. An important final note is that gaming history is rich and diverse, and it's very easy to take American console history as gospel. But in truth, every country has their own little history that's worth preserving and talking about. This was just a snippet of South Korea's. I hope you enjoyed, and next time I tackle a weird little mystery, hopefully I can get to the bottom of it. See you next time.